Hi, my name is Brigitte Willis and you are watching Fit Working Mom. And today I'm with Simone from UCT, who's a researcher and biokineticist. And she's going to take us through a couple of hints and tips for your little one, just in terms of gross motor skills and getting the little guys moving. Hi, Simone.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Simone's going to talk to us today about a couple of things pertaining to children activities, being more active, and just in general staying healthy. This all sprung from a Discovery Health assessment that I had a couple of weeks ago. Sammy was actually, according to his BMI, diagnosed as overweight. So there is this thing in the fitness fraternity where, well, not fitness fraternity, but in health and fitness, that your BMI has to be in a certain range according to a couple of measurements, which Simone's going to take us through. So Simone, tell us, how is it calculated, and what is the whole BMI thing?
So BMI is essentially a measurement that tells us how much you should weigh for your height. So obviously, if you're taller, you're going to weigh more because there's more of you, all right? So how we calculate it is we take your weight and we divide it by your height in meters squared. So you can tell just by the equation that the taller you are, the lower your BMI will be if you're at the same weight. So for example, you and I should definitely weigh something different because you're almost an entire head taller than me. The BMI measurement, it's very much a very global measurement. So what I mean by that is it's quite generic, it's quite broad. It does make certain assumptions, and it doesn't take into account, for example, how much muscle mass you have versus how much fat mass. So for example, and bone mass, yeah. So for example, you might take a rugby player who's perhaps 2 meters tall. And if you think about the demand on their body, they should weigh a lot. They need to be muscular, they need to be heavy, versus someone who's perhaps like a model or a different sportsman or sports player. So BMI doesn't take into account those elements. So it's a good sort of like measure like to ring maybe alarm bells, yes. But it's certainly not the be all and the end all. It's not in research and in practice as well. We don't use it as the sole measure of body composition. That's why we measure things such as skin folds, which you would do, for example, with like a caliper, or we take waist measurements or hip measurements or other measurements as well, because those help us to give a much sort of like bigger picture. Another thing that BMI doesn't take into account is how your body weight is distributed. So for example, we know that in adults, if you have all of your weight sort of like around your organs, that's particularly unhealthy or particularly dangerous. So obviously BMI doesn't take that into account because it's only taking into account 2 measures, and that's your height and your weight. So it's a good overall sort of indicator.
Spark the alarm bells, as you said, so that if there is a problem, you can solve it.
But it's certainly not the be all and end all. And I would say that if you're wanting to get a comprehensive idea of what your body composition or your adiposity or your fatness or whatever you'd like to call it, it is necessary to do like height and weight and waist, and depending on how old you are, to make sure that those measurements are specific.
Okay, so we've now taken Sammy and measured him. What is your kind of idea? Where do you think he's at in terms of that? You explained like off camera to me about his height and how that all fits in. So it's important, obviously, for people to understand that if your kid is really tall, for example, that his BMI is not going to be the same as necessarily Yanni down the road, who might be a little bit shorter.
Yeah. So the one thing that I noticed about Sammy, and it was pretty much on arrival, is Sammy is incredibly tall for his age. So when I'd looked at some of sort of like my research documents, he's in like the 99th percentile. So he is, relative to other kids his own age, he's quite literally, he's probably heads and shoulders above several of his classmates. To a certain extent, I would expect that because you're incredibly tall as well. And maybe one day when he's 21, 22, he's probably going to be even taller than you. Yeah. And that's certainly something to consider. He was classified by our research standards as overweight. I do think it's something that as he gets taller, he'll definitely start slimming down, provided that his nutrition is great. And that's why I also took his waist circumference for you as well. Even though we don't have norms for his particular age group, it is a really, really good way to look at the whole body distribution. I don't think kids really enjoy being pinched and that sort of thing, so I didn't take those measurements, but it certainly will help from your perspective as he goes. And yeah, who knows, maybe with like his next 2 or 3 growth spurts, he'll just like slim down.
Get back into shape.
But he is incredibly tall. I mean, I was looking at kids at the kiddies gym who were older than him. There was a child there that was 6 months older than him who was almost a head shorter. Sure. So just to give you an idea, like that is the variation that we deal with.
I think it's important to keep into consideration. So tell me the exercises or the tests that you did. What was that all about? How does it fit in to where he needs to be, or how can other adults like kind of sort of measure where their kids need to be, or is it a professional test only? Yeah.
So the test that I did was the test for gross motor development. It is an American-based test, and we use it quite regularly in research. So when we speak about, so let me start at the beginning. So Sammy is 6, and yes, it's important for him to be fit and lean and healthy and all those other things as well. But the main thing when we look at kids his age is it's really important that he plays and he has fun and he does things that are age appropriate. And for example, at his age, he should be, playing with soccer balls, playing with bouncing balls, hitting objects and running up and down and, behaving in a crazy way. That's an age appropriate thing for him to do. So the test for gross motor development is a test of 12, it's got 12 different items, 6 which focus on locomotor or movement skills, and 6 object control skills. So object control is basically like a ball, so anything that requires an implement. Yeah. So the 6 locomotor skills that we measure are like his ability, and according to criteria, to run, to gallop, to hop, to leap, to jump, and then to slide. So that's a sideways movement. So we did those 6, and then after that we did another 6, and that's the object control. And that's all ball-based, so it's a strike, so how to hit a ball, kick, catch, throw, roll, and for the life of me, I cannot remember the 6th one off the top of my head. It'll come to me a little. Oh, bounce, that one. So those 12 activities, if we think in research, are basically age-appropriate activities. The test itself is designed for children aged 3 to 10. The reason why it pretty much stops at 10 is usually by the age of 10, children are usually doing sports-specific activity. In South Africa, they tend to start sports a little bit earlier, so sort of like grade 2 or grade 3, depending on what school they're at. So then they would have maybe started practicing soccer or cricket or rugby or softball or netball or whatever the case may be, in which case the skills that we test are pretty much, think of them as the base on which you build all those other skills. Yes. So that's why we test gross motor skills in kids, because it's necessary for them to do these things before they actually like practice other skills that are a little more sports specific. So for example, the kick is a pretty sort of like, it's a very straightforward movement. Like you have to put a ball down, you have to run towards it, and you have to kick it in a straight line or towards a particular target. But that is a very fundamental skill. When you're putting that in context of soccer, you're basically going to not necessarily run towards the ball, but you might actually run with the ball, and then you'll pass to a friend, and then you'll receive it again, and then you'll strike at goal. So you can see why the kick, for example, is very necessary for soccer sort of thing. It's one of the drawbacks of the test because it was developed in America, so it's not the most appropriate one to use in South Africa, but it is validated. So it's still a very good measure for gross motor development. I added by my own will, because another component of gross motor skills is balance or balancing skills. So that includes, I think the most easy one to think about is a stalk stand. So that's basically standing still and how you hold your balance.
Isn't that also the drunk test when you get pulled over?
It probably is. But I think if you're someone who's well practiced, You can
So
probably...
you'll pass with flying colours.
Gosh, I hope so. So you get two types of balance. You get static balance, which is being able to stand still and hold your balance, and then you get dynamic balance, which is the one activity I did with Sammy, which was the heel to toe walk, which is when you walk like that. So that's also, those are really important. Funny enough, it's the same sort of tests that we do in geriatrics to make sure that they're functional as well. So it's not something that you need to only do when you're 5 or 6. It's also really important to do when you're 55 and 56. So I added those as well, because I think that gives a far more sort of comprehensive assessment of gross motor skills.
Okay. There's a couple of things, like just quick questions that I think that people would want to know. Like, how many minutes a day should your kid be active?
Sure. This is dependent on how old your child is. So we are currently at UCT, and one of my colleagues who works for WITS, we're working on developing guidelines, particularly for the age range of birth to 5, or from birth to preschool years. So the guidelines are different for children who are 6 and up. So for preschool children should be active for 3 hours per day. That doesn't have to be all in one go, although if you can get a child running around for 3 hours straight, then kudos. Good job.
Come to my house.
You've done well. So it should be 3 hours. Those 3 hours should encompass a variety of activities. So they shouldn't just be running or just be swimming. It should be, like I said earlier, like 6-year-olds and 5-year-olds should be sort of like doing a variety of things. And to be quite honest, most 5 and 6-year-olds get bored after 5 or 6 minutes. 100%. And they want to sort of like change activities. For the preschool age, it's 3 hours, and of those 3 hours, 1 hour should be what we call energetic play. So you think of something that's energetic, like skipping, climbing, things that really like get their heart rate up. For 6-year-olds, the recommendation at this stage is 60 minutes per day, but that's exclusively of like energetic play.
That's almost like a gym session.
Pretty much. Although, like you say that, and I think, so this is like the bio in me coming out. If you go to gym for an hour, the likelihood that you are being sort of like vigorous or energetic for the full hour is quite unlikely. I mean, if you think about if you're doing weights,
you'd be taking selfies.
You're probably like walking up and down, and that. And so unless you're like on a bicycle or a treadmill for a full 60 minutes, so usually to get like a full hour, you're probably going to need like a little bit of a longer session. Much like the preschool age group for 6-year-olds or like sort of primary school kids. So Sammy's kind of like in the cusp of that, because he's still in preschool at the moment, but it's because he's recently turned 6. But again, that it should incorporate a variety of activities, but at least 1 hour should be sort of energetic. And that's because as we get older, sort of like fitness and physical activity becomes a little bit more important as well.
And sleep, how many hours of sleep?
So in the preschool age range, we're looking at about 10 to 13 hours.
That's quite a lot, yeah.
It is quite a lot. And for sort of like the younger kids in that age range, it might not all necessarily be at night. Okay, so I mean, if you think about it, like realistically, if we live in an area where you've got to commute to school and you've got to leave home by 6:30 or 7 a.m., it's not always realistic to send your child to bed at 6 p.m. So it's, you know, you've got to sort of like balance it. With kids a little bit older, they just need a little bit less, all right? But if you think about it, a 3-hour difference is actually quite big. You know, there's quite a wide range for how much sleep they need. So you might be the kind of person, so for adults it's supposed to be, I think, like 6 to 8 hours, or 7 to 9, but like you might do like 100% with 7 hours, but like, good grief, I need 9, otherwise I'm like the grumpiest human ever. So there's always some variation, and I think as a parent you'll probably know when the sweet spot is, you know, or you'll know, for example, you know, if you break routine, what the consequences are going to be the next day. So for example, if you've got a set routine, and a routine, especially for young children, is very important. Children respond well to boundaries. It might not seem like it, but they actually need boundaries. So if you've, for example, got a set routine at home where you say, supper is between 6:30 and 7, and then from 7 till 7:30 I read to my child, or read with them, depending on where they're at in terms of their reading. But then bedtime, so lights off and baby in bed or child in bed by 7:30. if they've got that same routine all the time, they'll get used to that.
Yeah, routine I think is very important because it also gives kids that security that they need, especially at a young age.
Yeah. And you want to foster good habits
100%.
at a younger age. And I say that, and people might be thinking, oh, isn't like 5 or 6 too late? Like, shouldn't you have started at 2? It's kind of like, maybe yes, but like.
But they're only understanding from a certain age.
Yeah, and we've got so much more information now than we had 3, 4, 5 years ago about the benefits of sleeping and good sleeping patterns and what they're now sort of calling sleep hygiene. So,
sleep hygiene.
So like, are you sleeping properly? Are you getting good quality sleep? That sort of thing. Yeah.
And then, yes, so we've completed all the tests. You've given the results, a report. And we're going to do a couple of exercises within the next couple of weeks that you're basically going to teach Sammy, and then you're going to give me some guidelines, and then we're going to give the listeners some or the watchers or the viewers some guidelines on how.
Wants them.
Guidelines for everyone. Look under your chin. Anyway, so we're going to do in the next couple of months. I'm not sure. I haven't worked out how many times. We'll do a couple of follow-up videos and a couple of tutorials on how you can incorporate active play with your little one as well. And then, yes, that wraps it up from us. Yeah. Thank you.